Hello, class, and welcome to week 2 formally. Happy New Year. I hope that you all had a wonderful holiday. So now we're getting into the swing of things, and I wanted to further explain myself. That first week was a little bit wonky, but I didn't get an opportunity to say that every week from me in the announcements you can expect a quote. As a former English major, I love to read, I love quotes, I think words are very powerful. In week 1, it came from a philosopher, Rilke, and this week's quote comes from Brian Greene. He's an astrophysicist, and he writes wonderful works for people like me who are not very good at math, so we can understand some of what's going on out in the universe, or the multiverse as he calls it. But I love this quote because it makes me think about our biases. And so the boldness of asking deep questions is that we're going to have to demonstrate unforeseen flexibility if we're going to accept the answers. And I think that when we think about our personal biases, we really have to call ourselves to the carpet. I think we like to think that we don't have any biases, but when truth, in truth, and when the rubber meets the road, there are certain things that we think, knee-jerk reactions that we might have about people or groups of people, etc. And so this week we're going to really look at our biases. Your chapter this week is phenomenal. I mentioned that in sort of the interim message. Chapter 7 has very good information in it, including a case study. When we think about, biases, and even when we think about a racist or racial statements, we often think, the person in the white hood, and we always think of it in the extreme, like, oh, I would never. But there's a wonderful case study in your chapter about Kevin, and oftentimes in counseling, this is how our biases present themselves in the counselor's seat. It's not necessarily, committing a microaggression, and you'll learn about that. But more so, it's what we don't see, or we refuse to see, that the client tells us about. And so when you read the case of Kevin, you'll see how insidious our biases can be, and how they can really shape the way a session goes. And so also in chapter 7 is a seminal text. I mentioned this too in the interim message, by Peggy McIntosh. She wrote this in the 80s. It's about white privilege, unpacking the invisible knapsack. Now, especially in our political climate today, the word privilege has so many connotations, and so I invite you to read the article. I remember when I was in your shoes as a master's student, I had a very, very visceral reaction to this article. You are not alone in having to read this article. Many a student who has gone through a diversity and counseling course has read this seminal text, and so I invite you to read that. I invite you to be attentive to the reactions that you may or may not have in reading that article, especially as you think about your biases and how they may or may not influence your work as a professional counselor. This week, very quickly this week, I'm going to get back to you all of the assignments you completed in week 1. I look forward to giving you feedback on Jeanette. I've already watched your videos, and I look forward to getting those back to you about your otherness. And so those are what you can expect back from me. What I can expect from you this week is a journal about your biases and another video. The last thing I want to say about biases is when we think about biases, oftentimes it's easy for us to think about or empathize with the marginalized person. And so we think about, individuals who've been done wrong by society. We think, hey, I can easily empathize with this person. When I was in my master's program was when Hurricane Katrina hit, and I've never been to New Orleans. I know one of our students lives there. However, having never been to New Orleans, what happened was we were listening to NPR, and there was an interview between residents of New Orleans when Hurricane Katrina hit. They were leaving where they were in the lower district. It was very low. It was being flooded. And apparently there's some bridge that takes people from the lower district to higher ground, but this higher ground is a very affluent neighborhood. And so these scores of individuals were trying to cross over this bridge on foot. And they were met on the bridge by the sheriff and many law enforcement officials, the sheriff who was holding a gun, and told the people to turn around and go back to where they came from. And so my instructor, she stops the interview and she sort of asks us, can you put yourself in these people's shoes? And we were all riled up, like, yes, of course we can put ourselves in these people's shoes. We can think about what it would be like to counsel these people. So then my professor asks, what about the sheriff? Can you put yourself in his shoes? Can you work with him as a client? And so that is my charge to you. as you think about your biases. Not only, being a champion for marginalized peoples, but also, people that you might consider, people that you think might make vile decisions. Can you work with them also? I look forward to getting your work and grading your work, and welcome to week 2. Thanks.